The air hung heavy, a suffocating shroud that pressed down on Hannah as she crouched in the bowels of the abandoned radio station. The basement reeked of decay, damp concrete, rusted metal, and the acrid tang of something long dead. The dim emergency light flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows that danced like specters on the walls. Beside her, Caleb trembled, his small frame curled into a ball, his wide, glassy eyes darting to every corner of the room. The station had been their sanctuary for 2 weeks, but now it felt like a mausoleum, its walls closing in, its silence deafening. Outside, the creatures prowled. They moved with a predatory grace, their grotesque, insect-like forms blending seamlessly into the darkness. Their bodies were a nightmare of chitinous armor and spindly limbs, their eyeless faces a mass of pulsating flesh and exposed cartilage. They were silent, save for the faint, wet clicking of their mandibles.
But their hearing was flawless. A single misstep, a whisper, even the faintest rustle of fabric, and they would come. They always came. The world had fallen silent nearly a year ago. Cities had crumbled into graveyards, their streets littered with the remnants of a civilization that had been erased in a matter of weeks.
Humanity had been reduced to scattered, terrified remnants, clinging to life in the shadows. For Hannah and Caleb, survival had become a relentless, suffocating game of silence and stillness. But tonight, the rules had changed. Hannah clutched the handheld radio, her fingers slick with sweat as she twisted the dials. The static hissed and crackled, a sound that had become both a lifeline and a curse. The theory had been simple. If they could find a broadcast, perhaps others had survived. Perhaps there was still hope. But the static was all they ever found. Until now, the radio sputtered, and then impossibly, a voice broke through. Frequency, safe, repeat, broadcast, if you hear this. Hannah's breath hitched, her heart slamming against her ribs. She leaned closer, her hands trembling as she adjusted the dial, desperate to clear the signal. But the voice dissolved back into static, leaving only a chilling silence in its wake. "Did you hear that?" Caleb whispered, his voice barely audible, his eyes wide with a mixture of hope and terror. Hannah nodded, her lips forming the words, "Help. There's help out there." But before she could say more, the sound came. It was faint at first, a soft, deliberate scraping, like claws dragging across the floor above them. The sound sent a jolt of ice through Hannah's veins. Both siblings froze, their bodies rigid, their breaths shallow. The creatures had heard. They always heard. Hannah reached for Caleb's hand, her grip vice-like as she pointed toward the emergency exit on the far side of the basement. They moved together, their steps agonizingly slow, each footfall a calculated risk. The scraping grew louder, more deliberate, as if the creature was savoring the hunt. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper as the thing above them shifted, its weight creaking the floorboards. The exit was just a few feet away when Caleb's foot caught on something. He stumbled, his hand slipping from Hannah's grasp. A loose can of paint rolled out from the shadows, its metallic clatter echoing like a gunshot in the suffocating silence. Hannah's heart plummeted as she turned to see Caleb's face drain of color. Above them, the scraping stopped. The silence that followed was unbearable, a vacuum that seemed to suck the air from the room. And then, the sound of rapid skittering movement filled the space, a cacophony of claws and chitinous limbs. The creature dropped from the ceiling vent, its elongated body folding and unfolding with unnatural fluidity as it hit the ground. It stood over 7 feet tall, its eyeless face, a grotesque mass of pulsating flesh and exposed muscle. Its head swiveled grotesquely, its mandibles clicking wetly as it zeroed in on their frantic heartbeats. Its ears twitched like radar dishes, locking onto their every movement. Hannah yanked Caleb toward the door, her muscles screaming with the effort. They had seconds, maybe less. She shoved him through the exit and slammed the heavy metal door shut behind them, her hands fumbling with the rusted bolt. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched, ear-splitting sound that reverberated through her skull like a blade. They ran into the night, the open landscape offering no refuge. The creature's shrieks echoed behind them, growing fainter but never disappearing. Hannah knew it was still hunting. It would never stop. In the distance, a faint red light blinked. A tower, the source of the broadcast. It was miles away across a barren, exposed wasteland, but it was their only hope. "We have to get there," Hannah whispered, her voice breaking as she pulled Caleb along. His small hand was cold and clammy in hers, his breaths coming in shallow gasps. Behind them the shrieks began again, closer this time, and then another sound joined them, a chorus of wet clicks and guttural growls. Hannah's stomach churned as she realized the truth. The creatures weren't alone anymore. There were more,